Laura Moriarty, Jim Davis, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
As we're talking about at the top of the program, we like to connect talking about all things cannabis retail on a monthly basis because, well, I think this is the most exciting part of the sector, but also certainly on the Canadian front, the ramp up is massive. But over the past couple of weeks, days, we've seen New York approve legalization, and that'll have a whole retail component. New Mexico as well, and I think dominoes are falling. And as dominoes fall, competition increases, the expert level by which these retailers are going to need to operate increases, and getting people in the store is going to be hyper competitive. And Jim, that's hard.
That's hard. Yeah, I think, there's lots of opportunities for retailers to engage with consumers. So, I'll just jump into it, and I'm going to introduce Laura as well. But, our topic today is driving customers in store through digital marketing. It's as simple as that. Really two topics. Laura's going to kick off with just an overview from Leafly's perspective, like who is today's cannabis consumer? And this is a snapshot of like what I think is the most active and kind of vibrant cannabis community online, which is Leafly. And it's, looking at their motivations, their preferences, their general profile. So that's exciting. And then we'll kind of wrap things up at the end with kind of discussing like the importance of unlocking programmatic specifically for cannabis retail marketers. So I think this is going to take like 30 minutes, maybe 35 minutes. But without further ado, I will pass it over to Laura to kind of walk us through today's cannabis consumer.
Great. Hi, my name's Laura Moriarty. I run marketing and content at Leafly. At Leafly, we're really focused on making sure that people have the information they need to understand cannabis, the confidence to select the cannabis products that are right for them, and the ability to walk into all of the amazing retailers in Canada and beyond and purchase those products in store. So we offer tools for all parts of that journey. 120 million people will visit Leafly this year as part of their cannabis journey. So we're here to help folks discover cannabis and what it can do in their lives. When we think about the cannabis consumer, the most important thing to know is that anybody has the potential to be a cannabis consumer, and there are plenty of markets that folks can dig into as they find their own niche, whether it's as a brand or as a retailer. And we think that's a really important part of thinking through your strategies as a company. And that's what we often tell the retailers and brands we work with. There are plenty of different directions to go. There is no one size fits all, and we're at a really interesting time in the market. So the first thing I'd love to chat with you about are some of the demographics we're seeing in the consumer profile in cannabis. And what you'll see pretty quickly is that the range of folks is pretty broad from an age spectrum. Now, as you would expect, there's a large group of folks who are in that 21 to 25 range who are using cannabis. And that's not a surprise to us at Leafly. If you think about, these are the folks who came of age in an era where legalization and stigma were starting to fall apart and fall away. So they have a different experience than folks that are a couple generations ahead of them. So this is not a surprising thing for us, but we do see a really sizable chunk of folks who are in that 55 plus age range coming to Leafly to understand cannabis. It's upwards of 25% of our audience. So if you think it's just the 21 to 25-year-olds, not so much. It's a really nice mix of folks with a range of incomes, a range of professions, a range of educational attainment. And, some of them have kids, some of them don't. It's about 50-50. And we see just as many men and women coming into the space, especially in Canada. So a range of people that you can choose from as you look at who you want to target from a retail perspective. So from a location perspective, where are these folks from? You'll not be surprised that the majority of people coming to Leafly right now looking for cannabis are doing so from Ontario and from the population centers. But what you're going to see, and we continue to see, especially as more retail licenses are granted and more folks are opening up stores, is we're starting to see the surge of the suburbs coming into play. It's not just these urban centers that are the core of the retail experience today in Canada. So that's an important thing to note, that while you're used to seeing Toronto and Calgary, we're starting to see large increases in traffic from places like Red Deer and Surrey and North York. And I think that's an important thing to point out, that as retailers open, the communities get really focused. And that's something we look a lot at. Okay, so from a temporal trends of things we see on Leafly that I think are valuable for retailers, every day traffic related to cannabis on our website tends to reach kind of a peak mid-afternoon and kind of stay there till the evening. So we know afternoon and evening in Canada are when we see people shopping the most for cannabis. Not totally surprising if you're working after work, after whatever you're doing, heading into the evening hours to unwind. I don't think that's surprising to anyone. The other thing that we often see is that over the course of the week, traffic starts to increase on our site of people who are looking for cannabis. So it really starts to increase on Fridays and Saturdays. That's why on Saturdays we send out our Canada newsletter. It's the time of the week that we know people are actively shopping for cannabis. They're actively looking for new products to try. And so that's when we try to reach them. And we also encourage other folks to take a look at some of those trends that they're seeing, whether it's on our site or, as Jim's going to talk about later, some of the trends we're seeing in advertising and how advertising is performing in digital channels, to kind of time some of your own initiatives to those peak shopping times that we see in the marketplace. Now, one of the favorite topics that people love to hear about in Leafly is, what are people looking for on Leafly? So this is one of these areas that you can spend a lot of time digging into, but there are a couple types of traffic on Leafly, and this is where I think the fun of Leafly is. We have over 5,000 strains in our strain database. It's a huge resource that people use all the time. So when I talk about customers on Leafly who are up for grabs, I'm talking about customers who are coming into Leafly and they're just searching for different strains, different products. They're maybe browsing the news, but they haven't gone straight into what we call our just obvious shopping funnel, was hitting our finder and our dispensary pages and going straight to finding a dispensary. So in this browsing behavior, about 44% of people who are searching around Leafly are searching for strains. And the most popular strain that they're searching for in Canada is Blue Dream. And that's about 1.6% of searches in Canada right now. Now, 1.6% doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've got 5,000 strains, it's actually a pretty good percentage. So some of the other strains you'll see are Wedding Cake, Original Glue, Pink Kush, and Death Bubba. Those are some of our highest search strains in Canada right now on Leafly. And one of the things we encourage as part of your kind of digital advertising program is, for the folks who are on Leafly, you can link your menus to those strains and we will serve up your products that you're selling at your store on those strain pages to the people who are closest to you. So we're trying to continue to find ways to integrate how customers can find the products at the stores near them into those strain shopping experiences more and more. So that's a place that folks spend a lot of time on our site, and we continue to try to build value for the consumer to make it easier, not just to understand that strain, but to purchase it near them in their neighborhood. So we've talked about like overall behavior. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the highest indexing consumer. So our highest indexing customer in Canada is not going to surprise you. This customer is generally male. They're between the ages of 21 and 25. And as we've discussed before, this customer is likely to be someone who was not raised with the stigma that comes with cannabis because they've come out of the period of prohibition. They've come of age after prohibition's over. And we think that's okay. I think a lot of times you hear people say, oh, but man, it would be better if it was older. We're going to get there over time. And I think these are our early adopters. We're still early in the days of cannabis growth, but we're going to continue to see these demographics change, broaden, and shift over time from these early adopters who are purchasing and ordering their cannabis online to a broader population of folks who are going to feel more and more empowered and comfortable to do that. So that's why we always say education is so important. We'll continue to shift these numbers over time as we go. So what do these high indexing customers do that regular users don't do on Leafly? We often get asked this question a lot. They tend to come a lot more. They are likely to have a lot more sessions on Leafly's website. They understand that they're shopping around. They'll probably hit multiple different strain pages. Then they'll hit a couple product pages. Then they'll check out the deals that different retailers have on those products that they search. So they're really intentional about that shopping decision. And so they're coming to our site a lot to do that. And then the other piece is, you know, they're coming to our site a lot of times and they're hitting a lot of pages while they're here. So they're highly engaged users because they're highly engaged shoppers. They've taken the time to understand what they want, and now they're trying to figure out where they're going to get it. And how are they purchasing their cannabis? This is some of my favorite parts of this is Leafly website trends tend to align pretty well with what we're seeing from in-store behavior. And so we partnered with MiQ to really help us understand like how those overlaps work. And so we've seen strong correlation of people will be visiting in the afternoon and evening on Leafly. They're also showing up at the store afternoon and evening. So those are pretty aligned. And also from a daily traffic perspective, we're also seeing that, you know, when on the days where we have high traffic, it's because people are shopping and they want to buy things. And that is also what we're seeing when people are going to in-store. So Thursdays, Fridays, Saturdays tend to be great traffic days for Leafly. They also tend to be good footfall days for retailers. And finally, this is my favorite trend that we've been watching is as more retailers are opening, especially in Ontario, the distance that people are willing to travel for their cannabis is shrinking. So 44% of people are willing to travel 3 kilometers or less to get their weed right now. So that's one of the things that has really changed from a data perspective over the last 6 months as we've been watching the trends in Canada is that people don't have to travel so far. So they're not. They're going to what's easy, what's convenient, what has the deals, what has the products that are right for them. What we're seeing on visitation and frequency of cannabis customers is the vast majority of these folks are coming once a month and making big purchases, at least those who are being driven from online purchasing. And we think that's partially because of lockdowns that are happening across Toronto, Ontario, and then the other provinces. So we think that's probably going to shift as time moves on. In the United States in particular, we often see some of our most active customers purchasing 2 and 3 times a month. So we think this is a time-based anomaly, and then we'll start seeing more and more folks move into that 2 and 3 times of purchasing per month. But right now, that's where things are, but we think this is really a case of lockdown. So just to sum it up, you know, I threw a lot of data at you. I'm happy and excited to chat with you about that in the Q&A sessions later. But the real key takeaway here is that anyone does have the potential to be a cannabis consumer. If you find the times that work for the customer you want to target, Make sure that you're really looking at your neighborhood and the demographics of your neighborhood and catering to that group, because they're not coming from super far to get to you. You're going to make a big difference in how you reach those folks. We have some great tools on Leafly to help you capture how the strain searches that are happening on the web and bringing them directly into your store. So there are a lot of opportunities to win customers out there through digital advertising. And Leafly's happy and thrilled to be a part of that journey for many consumers and for retailers in this space. And now I'm going to pass back over to Jim to talk about some of the many myths that are out there around digital advertising and how you really shouldn't be afraid of digital advertising. There's a lot of good stuff out there.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Laura. First of all, I'm always excited as a marketer when I see a vibrant community like Leafly's, and just like how we can connect, brands to that audience, that highly engaged audience is really exciting for me. So Laura kind of mentioned this last section. First of all, it should take about 20 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. I'll speed things up, but we want to show you how to use rich audiences like Leafly's to engage with your cannabis consumers, but especially those that are not just on Leafly, but across the broader web, that are highly active in searching, researching, consuming content, but also making these buying decisions. So as Laura mentioned, on the next few slides, we're going to take a bit of a Mythbusters approach. And really, it's about debunking some of the, common misconceptions that we've been hearing over the last 2 years as we've been building out our cannabis solutions. Ultimately, I'd say the goal is to really remove any doubts so you as an advertiser and a marketer can take full advantage of the power of programmatic to maximize the outcomes from your media investments. We're going to end at the very end of my section with a 2-minute video that kind of wraps everything up, everything we've been talking about so far. Should be a good way, a little case study to show you guys how all this works. I think it's probably, let's start really quickly by defining what we mean by programmatic. And I think that the term programmatic often has become kind of this catch-all phrase, right? Everyone talks about programmatic and it's good, there's some bad in there. But at the most base level, programmatic just simply means the automation of buying and selling advertising. And in 2021, just as a reference point, like 90% of all the ads that you see, so when you go to a website or you open up an app and the ad that you see there, these are being served programmatically. So it is a big part of the ecosystem. And from our perspective at MiQ, really most ad formats, outside of just the display ads that I talked about a moment ago, most ad formats will be sold programmatically. So that's out of home, that's audio, that's television, mobile, display, video, all of those things are being sold programmatically. The only other term I'll talk about is artificial intelligence. I'm sure that's something that's come up and everyone thinks it's, again, it's a bit of wrapped up in that catch-all phrase, but AI is just another tool. It allows companies like ours to merge massive data sets, discover patterns and trends, and then to activate on those data sets in real time. But I think the most important piece here is never forget there's people behind that. There's the human intelligence factor that's informing all good programmatic strategy. So it's the humans in the background pushing the buttons and pulling the levers. So myth number one, and I hear this pretty regularly. Again, we've talked to, I'd say at this point, 100 different cannabis brands, if not more. And often what we hear is, programmatic is just too risky. And like when we really dig in on what that means to the different marketers that we talk to, it's really 3 key themes. One of them is around compliance, right? So this always comes up no matter what. The question is, are there really safeguards in place to ensure we're only reaching the most compliant audiences? Basically, I don't want Health Canada to find me. So how do I ensure that won't happen? The next is budgets. So, do I really have enough money and a budget to warrant doing programmatic advertising? And I think there's a bit of a stigma around programmatic where it's a set it and forget it. And you're going to wake up one morning and all your dollars have been spent and you have nothing to show for it. And lastly, it's, big players like Google and Facebook. They're not participating in the cannabis advertising space, right? And they have massive social and search intent graphs. If you can't plug into those, can you really know who your audience is? So this won't come as a surprise, but obviously it's our point of view that programmatic actually greatly reduces risk. And it's really about qualifying audiences. So I'll talk about that in a little more context. At the heart of good programmatic strategy is this concept of connectivity. So simply meaning like the connection of data, the connection of inventory and supply, the connection of ad formats, verification platforms, the connection of technology. All of that can happen in programmatic at a single point of contact. And before we kind of go through this slide, there's a lot of words on here, I realize, but I'll summarize it quite succinctly in a moment. Underarching everything and underlying everything is compliance. So taking a compliant approach is always the baseline of everything that we do at MiQ and everything you should do as a marketer. I would say there's really two major considerations when it comes to compliance. It's age is probably the most important, and geography. So in each province, there's different rules and regulations on how you can serve your ads. You need to make sure you're doing that compliantly as well. And at MiQ, we combine data coming from a number of different sources, including age-gated environments like Leafly, other kind of self-declared sources, primarily things like registration. So when you sign up for services like travel services, food services, e-commerce services, this is where you're completing a registration form and you're typically entering a valid credit card or some form of ID. This is the most compliant way of validating age and meets all the requirements from a Health Canada perspective. So let's go back to the advantages of programmatic. So outside of compliance now, we start to talk about how we can understand and target your audience. And the more data sources means better targeting. So we'll provide some examples in the next section of what we mean by data sources, but combining what we know about a consumer online, so for example, from Leafly, which is fantastic, with offline. So what are the offline influences? Is it raining that day? And is that going to change someone's ability to go into a physical location? It might, and all those things play a factor. So combining those together, we get a better sense of who the consumer is. There's cost efficiency. So consolidating supply together, so from endemic partners like Leafly and just the open kind of compliant web, we start to see what's performing best for your brand. And we can start to eliminate any wastage. So we're not serving on sites that don't perform and only focus on those that do perform best for your brand. There's stronger performance. So, we can focus on outcomes. And I think as some of the growing pains, I would say, of cannabis over the last 2 years, early on, the advertising really just focused around getting your message and your brand out there. Well, now you need to really focus on action. You need to focus on outcomes. And one of those can be, quite simply, is can we drive people to your online menu? Can we drive people to the click and collect on Leafly? Or can we actually physically drive someone into your store? And the last I'll say on this one is just this concept around elevated brand safety. Going back to what I was saying earlier about programmatic having a bit of a identity crisis, there's some things in there where there's fraud and all these words that come up a lot. But there are partners that we work with, IAS, Double Verify, ComScore, that validate that we're actually serving an ad to a real person. So we eliminate that risk right out of the gate. So ultimately, I think as you look at the power of programmatic, it's really the combination of data and supply and tech and verification solutions that ultimately eliminate risk for the advertiser. So that's myth number one around risk. I think the second one that we hear quite consistently, and again, over the last 2 years from LPs, from retailers and publishers alike, is there's just no data, right? We just don't understand specifically, I don't know who my unique consumer is or my audience is on my website. I don't know what their motivations or their product preferences are. I don't know where or when they're buying their cannabis. So all of that is valid. And I think the challenge is this lack of understanding typically leads brands to just focus on the retail experience, which we think is fantastic. It's a very important part of the cycle, but you need to qualify your audiences long before you ever send them into your store. So let me give you some examples. There's a massive amount of data available to us. I think Leafly absolutely nailed it. Just look at their vibrant community. There's so much that you can learn from them on what consumers are looking for. But when we talk about data, I just want to be clear. It's like there's data for compliance, which we just talked about. There's data for insights and planning. And what I want to focus on in this section is really just the data for actioning and targeting your media investments. So basically, like, how can we qualify an audience long before they ever step foot into your retail store? And just, I would say, for the sake of time, I'm only going to look at two examples. So I'm going to look at one for online, in terms of like the online signals that we see, and one for offline. So starting with online and kind of looking broadly, as we did with Leafly, you start broad. And what we see nationally is cannabis consumers from province to province are exhibiting different behaviors and buying signals. I'll just say this, like, from my experience, going back, I'll probably age myself, but I worked at Yahoo back in its heyday. And search is an absolutely amazing indicator of intent. And then content consumption is still king, right? Like, people are going to the web to consume content on a daily basis. And it's really showing you what their interests in the topics that they're most interested in. So with our unique technologies and some of our data partners, we start to see what all consumer activity looks like online. This includes the searches they're making, the content they're consuming, and importantly, the frequency that they're doing that. When you layer in unique publisher relationships like that with Leafly, you start to really refine the audience even further and understand things like, what are their product preferences? Are they leaning towards edibles? Are they leaning towards vape? Are they leaning towards flower? You can even start to understand things like motivations. What is it that is motivating them to consume cannabis? It could be an anxiety issue, a sleep issue, a focus issue. It could be a number of things. When you layer this baseline kind of consumer understanding with other data sources that start to give us an understanding of like demographics and behavior. So we partner with a company called Environics. And for those that aren't familiar, Environics is probably the de facto consumer marketing intelligence company in Canada. We start to really extract some interesting insights. So on this slide, we've given you two, very, very broad, but imagine what we can do with this information if we went right down to the individual level. So in British Columbia, if you look at the data here, you're seeing that in BC, you've got a consumer that is interested in flower and edibles. They're female, between the ages of 20 to 29 with a household income of 100K. Very different, actually, when you look at the audience in Ontario. And this audience, flower, similarly, but CBD. A male, 25 to 34, with a household income of 300,000 plus, and two individuals in a household. So just this top line understanding of the audience helps you now to start to target your messaging more appropriately to engage that consumer. And then, shifting to our lens to offline data. I read a report, I want to say a week ago, might have been on Business of Cannabis, by the way, but in Ontario, there's something like 88% of all cannabis purchases occur within the retail stores. It is an absolutely vital part of the cannabis community across Canada, not just in Ontario. And it's just a critical audience to engage with. The numbers that you're seeing here, the downshifting 73%, this was when COVID first hit. So obviously, as things locked down, you saw a tremendous amount of the audience and your consumers staying indoors and not going into stores. So a 73% decline in what we call footfall into stores. The good thing is, as things start to open up, more than the audience that wasn't going before has now more than doubled, and we're seeing 181%. This was late last year, 181% increase in footfall into stores. So again, a critical part of the ecosystem. This is where cannabis consumers prefer to buy their product. And we understand and identify these audiences before and after they visit your store, so you can message them and engage them with your brand along their journey. So it was quick. There's a lot more we can do. We talked about motivations. We talked about product types and strains, and there's really a tremendous amount of data that is available. And this is, online behaviors, geography, demographic. There's so much that we can do. And we hope that we've kind of debunked this myth that there really is no data out there. Last one, I promise. And I alluded to this before, the early days of cannabis advertising, at least in Canada, what we saw was really upper funnel activity, right? It was all about building awareness and driving the brand, and getting people to be aware of the different products that each brand carries. And I think as we've matured and evolved, there's scrutiny now on every dollar that's served. And that comes with the idea of measurement. And I think a lot of brands still feel like there is not the ability to measure impact of their media investments. And a lot of this, I would say, comes from the fact that there's a lot of different POS providers, online cannabis stores like the OCS just don't provide real-time data. Like, it's just really hard to get a gauge of if your advertising is working. I would just say, like, there's incredible value in measuring these cannabis consumers' behaviors online. And what I would say around two very distinct areas. One is the idea of online intent. So intent is not browsing behavior, right? They don't just come to the site and browse and look at a few things. They're actually performing actions that indicate they're ready to make a purchase. So think of things like going to the click and collect sections of Leafly, hitting the buy now button on your website, going to your store locator, things like that would tell us that this is, someone beyond just a browser. They're actually looking to make a purchase. And the one we'll dive in a little bit deeper on is offline attribution. So actually measuring the physical footfall of consumers, using their phone. We can understand where and when they go into retail stores. Measure the impact your messaging has on the consumer's behavior, right? We serve an ad to a consumer, they walk into a store, and then a week later they walk into another store. We can start to look at, are we driving net new visitors into your retail store? How are we increasing their visitation into your store, or are they going into other cannabis consumer stores? And are we able to change behaviors? So this is an important one. I think each store has a unique theme around their customer service and how they engage with the consumer. You might want to really highlight those in your ads, and can you shift behaviors from a consumer that's going into one of your competitor stores into yours? Essentially competitive conquesting. The only other thing I'll add here is, there's additional ways that we can measure purchase intent. One of them is through what we call brand lift studies, actually presenting a survey to consumers after they've been in your store, just to understand, like, what's their, what's the level of awareness they have of you among your competitive set? What's their intent to make purchases on a regular basis within your stores? What's their affinity around your brand? Things like that. Really valuable information. So, I would just say, like, clicks are important, but I'd say footfall is really key, especially for a retail marketer. And with our abilities to measure people's actions, we can actually show you and demonstrate that your ads are having an impact on the bottom line. So that wraps up this section. We're going to play a video now. It's a bit of a sizzle reel, if you will, but it's a case study of a brand that we've worked with called Figure. They've used both Leafly and MiQ capabilities, and we want to share with you just some of the outcomes from that.
The Canadian cannabis market is a vast and competitive field. For some brands, it can be tough to get noticed through a smokescreen of massive competitors and stifling marketing regulations. So, how do we get Figure, an up-and-coming challenger cannabis brand, to be top of mind with consumers? We had to get high on data. Online audience data from the Figure site, as well as a unique partnership with top cannabis site Leafly, allowed us to analyze what products and content people engaged with, and then categorize them into 3 types of cannabis users: active, experimenter, and budding consumers. Geolocation data allowed us to understand who was visiting over 800 retail locations across Canada, at what times they were likely to make those visits, and how often. By merging these data sets, we knew exactly when and where to reach our audiences with tailored messaging that drove them toward cannabis retailers that sell Figured products and away from those that don't sell Figured products. Simple, right? Wrong. Cannabis marketing wouldn't be cannabis marketing without strict federal regulations. To adhere to Health Canada guidelines, we utilized AgeGate and self-declared registration data from thousands of apps and websites, giving us certainty that Figure's ads would only reach people over the age of 19. So, how do we do? After rolling out our connected, data-driven advertising, the campaign showed some incredible results. As the campaign progressed, our targeting got smarter and smarter, reducing the cost per visit by 30%. At the select retail locations we partnered with, we influenced 20% of in-store visits, driving 2.5 times more people into stores. And Figure became one of the top search brands on OCS. But most importantly, Figure saw a sales increase of 300% at our targeted retail locations. High on data, high in results. That's the power of better connected marketing.
Laura and Jim, I learned a ton. And as evidence of that, I've made all these notes because I wanted to come back to them. And I'm actually going to head over to the Q&A to ask you guys questions too, because I really have a bunch of questions. Like the distance people are traveling is super interesting that Laura mentioned, but marrying that up with what Jim talked about, like there is massive opportunity there. If people aren't traveling more than 3 kilometers, you look at that at radius of your store and just hone that. And I have more questions like that.
Cool. Yeah, ask away. I wanted to say thank you to Business of Cannabis. It's always been a pleasure working with you guys. You guys do amazing work in the space. And Laura and our partners at Leafly, thank you very much.
Well, thank you both for being here. And we will be heading over and you'll see it. I can never tell which way I'm supposed to point because of the camera, but on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see it go live. It'll say sessions. There'll be a bright red thing. Go there and you'll be able to ask Laura and Jim questions. And I've written it down a bunch of questions, so I'll be over there kicking it off. So Jim and Laura, thank you so much.
Thank you.